I think it's more insidious today because of the technologies of control. Back then, back then you had really terrible people running the agency, like Alan Dulles and James Jesus Angleton, Frank Wisner, people who were genuinely murderous and felt like there was no, controls on their behavior. And they started Operation Mockingbird at that point, which was an operation to compromise American journalists. So they had about 400 journalists that we know of. Carl Bernstein wrote an article about Mockingbird around 1975 or 76 in Rolling Stone. And at that point, I think there were some 400 editors, journalists, from all the largest publications. The New York Times had been compromised. The Washington Post was basically...
What do you mean by compromised for people who...
Well, they were functioning. The high-level people at those journals were working for the agency or had signed secrecy agreements with those agencies, with the CIA.
You really need to know about this subject if you're a normie, because normies typically tend to believe the nightly news at face value. Kind of like people back in communist Russia believe in their media because, after all, they had freedom of the press, right? Everybody knows that. Their constitution guaranteed it. Anyway, I'm going to talk about Operation Mockingbird, which is a documented program the CIA implemented here in the U.S. Its existence was established by the Church Committee in the late 70s and is a matter of Senate record. So, Operation Mockingbird was a secret CIA project launched in the early 1950s to influence and manipulate media in order to shape public opinion. The CIA sought to control news outlets, journalists, and other media organizations to ensure the information presented aligned with their interests and objectives. The project involved covert activities such as funding and training and even direct manipulation of journalists and news organizations.
Do you have any people being paid by the CIA who are contributing to a major circulation American journal?
We do have people who submit pieces to American journals.
Do you have any people paid by the CIA who are working for television networks?
This, I think, gets into the kind of getting into the details, Mr. Chairman, that I'd like to get into in executive session.
People being paid by the CIA who are contributing to the national news services, AP and UPI.
Well, again, I think we're getting into the kind of detail, Mr. Chairman, that I'd prefer to handle in executive session.
Okay, it's believed that the CIA has connections with major news outlets such as the New York Times, Washington Post, and CBS News, along with prominent journalists like Walter Cronkite. A lot of you younger folks, spring chickens, you wouldn't know who Walter Cronkite probably was. Man, everybody watched Walter Cronkite. He was the face of news. I mean, he was it. He was like the holy saint. He was like the Elijah the prophet of the news media. But then flash forward to today. The sole owner of the Washington Post is a CIA contractor, and WAPO has never once disclosed this conflict of interest when reporting on U.S. intelligence agencies per standard journalistic protocol. Just look up old Bezos, Mr. Kisses. Look him up, man. He's hip deep with the CIA. And here he is running a major newspaper. Good grief. Mass media outlets now openly employ intelligence agency veterans like John Brennan, James Clapper, Michael Hayden, and Andrew McCabe. I mean, these guys ran the CIA, and they're on record lying to Congress. What makes you think they wouldn't lie to you? And then there's known CIA assets like Ken Dillian, and I don't know him. I don't watch NBC. But anyway, and CIA interns like Alice Anderson Cooper and CIA applicants like Tucker Carlson. Yeah, Cooper interned for the CIA for 2 summers. I mean, you're not going to tell me that guy's not jacked in. And Carlson's daddy was hip deep with the agency. And, I never found any evidence to link Fox with any of this stuff, except for the fact that Rupert Murdoch had a lot of direct contacts with the agency back when he started Fox. But that doesn't mean it's not true, because I'd bet you anything that they're just as dirty with it as any of them. I mean, in the case of Brennan and Clapper and those guys, it's not a question of the media being used by the CIA. The media is the CIA. Think about that. The Rolling Stone, the Daily Beast, and there's some others you're going to see in a minute. Let's continue. Take a trip down memory lane here with Richard Nixon and Watergate. And the Washington Post, no less. He was brought down by a couple of reporters, Woodward and Bernstein and Woodward. And there they are. Bernstein's the guy with the hair. I don't know how in the world you get your hair to look like that unless you deliberately, went to a hairstylist or something. And then there's Woodward. Now, this is fishy. Bob Woodward was a naval intelligence officer who came out of nowhere to work with Carl Bernstein to bring down Nixon. And he had all kinds of CIA contacts. Of course, he was a naval intelligence officer. He came out of nowhere. He hadn't been a reporter. And then he goes right into the biggest newspaper, or one of the biggest newspapers in the country, and steps right into one of the biggest stories with no reporting experience. And I heard one story about Bernstein being involved with the agency, but I'm not. That's the only one I've found. I haven't found anything to implicate him. Anyway, sometime later, after all that occurred, and they brought Nixon down, Bernstein investigated the CIA's links to the news media and reported that more than 400 American journalists actually worked for the CIA. Bernstein went on to reveal that this cozy arrangement had covered the preceding 25 years. Sources told Bernstein that the New York Times, America's most respected newspaper at the time, was one of the CIA's closest media collaborators. Now, there's a pattern here. I'm going to digress a second. Kennedy wanted to shut down the military-industrial complex and stop all these goddamn wars. Nixon was too. Nixon was just the biggest anti-commie hawk in the world, and he was trying to make peace. He was doing, arms limitations talks to limit nuclear weapons with Russia, and he was opening up China, and then look what happened to him. And then now we've got another president, ex-president, maybe going to be the president again, and he did the same thing, trying to rein in these sons of bitches. And look what's happening. It might be a little too obvious to kill both of them, Nixon and Trump, but, it's the same thing. Let's look at some past examples, shall we? Glenn Greenwald highlighted an interesting point about the reporting by the New York Times on the so-called Bounty Gate story. The outlet reported about the Russian government trying to pay Taliban-linked fighters to attack U.S. soldiers in Afghanistan, which turned out to be false. That was wrong. It was false. But most people don't know that. They come out saying, oh, Russia, they're them mean old nasty Ruskies. They're trying to put bounties on our little men over there, and they're going to kill them and get money for it. Them nasty Russians. Well, that was a lie. Didn't happen. But Greenwald pointed out, I'll read this, one of the New York Times reporters who originally broke the Russia Bountygate story later said that it was a CIA claim. So media outlets reported CIA stories with no question. The CIA sent them a story, and they just put it out like it was the truth. Now tell me, if these guys are going to do that, then what makes you think they're not going to do that only a couple of years later with all kinds of other propaganda about the Russians and everybody else? Who knows? There's a reporter just up and quit because of his network's links to the CIA. MSNBC reporter William Arkin, a longtime and well-known military reporter, resigned from his job with MSNBC while admitting the network has become infiltrated by deep state operatives. According to the respected military reporter, MSNBC is now the propaganda arm of the CIA and FBI and routinely peddles disinformation to the masses. And you know that if he came out and just said that to the world, that he was committing career suicide doing that. And I'm sure he was and did. Anyway, that story comes from the People's Voice. I got that from the People's Voice. I use them a lot on my blog. But, think about it. There he is.
But in 2016, Obama, there's a provision in the CIA charter that says that the CIA cannot propagandize the American people. President Obama adopted and I think it was through an executive order in 2016, that essentially reopened the door for Operation Mockingbird so that the CIA began once again to propagandize American people.
How are they doing that presently?
Well, I mean, we know that they did it. We've published articles on the CHD website that shows the journals that appear now where high-level intelligence officials are, or people associated with the intelligence industry, are running those journals, like Noah Schlackman, who runs Rolling Stone, who came from Daily Beast. Daily Beast was run by John Avalon, who has deep ties to the intelligence agencies. But even journals like Smithsonian and National Geographic, Nature, the Washington Post, the New York Times appear to be compromised by the CIA.
Oh, but it goes further than just putting out stories. The CIA provides various forms of training to journalists and media personnel involved in Operation Mockingbird. This training often focused on propaganda techniques, psychological operations, and methods for sharing public opinion. Journalists were taught how to present information in a way that would manipulate the audience's emotions and beliefs while still maintaining the appearance of objective reporting. The CIA also provided financial support and resources to participating journalists and media organizations to ensure the cooperation and compliance with the project's objectives. The financial support provided by the CIA to journalists and media organizations involved in Operation Mockingbird varied. Some received direct payments, while others were given access to exclusive information, travel opportunities, or other resources. In some cases, the CIA established front companies such as In-Q-Tel or various foundations to fund media outlets and journalists indirectly. There's a little flowchart there. There's In-Q-Tel, and then what they'll do. I mean, there's the CIA, there's In-Q-Tel, and then In-Q-Tel would give money to various organizations and corporations like Google, Microsoft, Facebook. It's widely reported that Facebook was begun with CIA money. And if In-Q-Tel doesn't give it to them directly, In-Q-Tel gives it to another front company, which gives it to them. It's a layer of deceit, plots within plots, plans within plans.
And no one wants to hear it. I'm sure most people won't believe it, but I can tell you, having lived it for many years, it's true. The intel agencies have a big effect on what is broadcast on television and what you see on Facebook and Google as well. I mean, they're all up and down Facebook and Google, as I'm sure you know. And, there are a lot of anchors who, including people I know well and have worked with at different networks. I'm thinking of one in particular, a national security reporter who was just a mouthpiece for the Pentagon and the CIA and is knowingly telling lies on their behalf. That's very, very common, very common. And I can think of a number of people at CNN who I know for a fact are doing that exact thing. And so, I mean, they're reading government propaganda from the intel agencies knowingly. And I'm sure they've got some internal rationale that allows them to get up in the morning and face themselves despite having done something that dishonest. But I'm just telling you, bottom line, I know that is true. I'm not speculating at all. And in particular on the national security stuff, there are very well-known national security reporters, and I'm thinking of one female national security reporter in particular, who just reads lies from the national security state. And it's wildly frustrating. And it would just make me mad. I mean, even if I don't agree with the lies, okay, but even if I did agree with the lies, I would be offended because they're lies. They're lies. Like when CIA and the Pentagon were claiming that Bashar al-Assad used poison gas against his own people. Okay, there was no evidence that was true. I mean, maybe it was true. There was no evidence it was true. None. Zero. And I called them out, and they could not provide any evidence. And yet every national security, and it was a big deal. I mean, we killed a lot of people in response. We sent in missiles and killed a lot of people. We took human life in response to that claim. And it was, as far as I can tell, a lie. And every national security reporter, every channel repeated it uncritically. The Biden administration blew up Nord Stream and, created the largest act of industrial sabotage in history, the largest man-made CO2 emission in history, an environmental crime. This is a huge deal. This happened. And every national security reporter just looked right into the camera and said, well, we think Russia did it. Well, they knew Russia didn't do it. That's a lie. And they knew it was a lie. So I just think, and again, I'm not speculating. I spent my life in this business, so I've seen it. People underestimate the degree to which the people sitting on the news, possibly even Wolf Blitzer, are repeating talking points from the intel agencies and doing it on purpose. It's scary, man. Really scary.